Nobody likes to be lied to. You don't, especially when it comes to your hard-earned money and you're going to spend it on a video game that you're excited for. It can be really easy for us to get swept up in clever marketing once that hype train leaves the station. I've done it. Welcome to Chaos Gaming. Today we're going to be looking at 15 first-person shooters that promised us greatness, but they were big fat liars. Let's just be real about it. You let me know in the comments which of these games disappointed you the most. Thank you for 30,000 subscribers on the Chaos Gaming YouTube channel. Thank you for almost 170,000 likes on the Chaos Gaming Facebook. You guys are absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. At number 15 today, Brink. On the Brink. Brand new multiplayer shooter, and it was developed by Slash Damage. It was published by Bethesda. The team that worked on this game had also brought us Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, Quake Wars, the Doom 3 multiplayer, and more. Now, okay, we were excited. We were excited to see what they could do with a brand new IP, but Brink was a hot mess. It was trying to be this big, elaborate parkour shooter, but due to all the bugs and the weird design choices, it was dead on arrival. A few years after launch, Bethesda tried one more time to save it by making it free to play, but as you can probably guess, that wasn't enough. Brink is now dead forever. When you make a game free to play and you still can't save it, there's a problem with the game. At number 14, Rage 2. Speaking of Bethesda games, Rage 2, the game that was hyped up like crazy, then poof, it disappeared into the cloud. It was a sequel released 8 years after the original. If we're being honest, the original wasn't the best. I mean, it looked amazing, but the gameplay was pretty underwhelming. Bethesda wanted everybody to think that Rage 2 would be an amazing experience, correcting the mistakes of the original while still maintaining that incredible attention to detail. Well, Rage 2 looked pretty, but the gameplay, it was somehow even more forgettable than the first game. It was repetitive, boring, not nearly as good as it was promised. At number 13, Serious Sam 4. This is one of those franchises that's always been around, but it kind of goes in and out of the spotlight. In 2020, Serious Sam 4 was set to release, and with the popularity of the new Doom and Wolfenstein games, people thought Serious Sam was the next in line for a modern-day explosion into popularity. Well, they were wrong. Once it came out, people put it down instantly after a few hours because not only was it extremely buggy, it was just generic. It doesn't really do anything unique, and while it's not a bad game, it's nowhere near as good as some of the previous titles. Serious Sam is a really fun franchise, and while the fourth game looks incredible, it just didn't have the gameplay to back it up. At number 12, this one got me, I spent my money. Crysis Remastered. Are you kidding me? We were so excited. The original Crysis blew people away. The graphics were crazy. Still good to this day, okay? And when they announced they were going to remaster that particular game, okay, we thought we were going to get the most lifelike game ever. Crysis Remastered dropped in 2020. It dropped hard. Negative reviews, the abundance of technical issues, and the lack of actual progress made from the original. Heck, there were even a lot of instances where the remastered game looked worse than the original. How do you do that? It was later revealed that this was a remaster of the console version, not the PC version, which led to worse visuals, but also a bunch of new technical issues. Crysis Remastered was a failure. It's one of the most disappointing FPS games of the last few years. At number 11, Battlefield 5. Now, Battlefield is set to make a triumphant return this year, but for the purposes of this list, we're going to look at the game that forced them to take a break. BF5 dropped in 2018. It took us back to World War II, although you'd be forgiven for not thinking it was World War II, because DICE took a lot of creative liberties when bringing this conflict to life. BF5 got off to a rough start. It did less than stellar in marketing, and then once the game actually came out, it was clear it wasn't ready to drop. Bugs, glitches, balancing problems, severe lack of content. It was perhaps the weakest Battlefield game in the decade. Now, they did their best to patch it up and bring it to Battlefield standards, but by that point, people were gone. Battlefield 6 is set to release later this year, so hopefully it's the shot in the arm that franchise and community actually needs. At number 10 today, Fallout 4. It's one of the most beloved RPG franchises in gaming history, so why is it on this list? Well, it's where they started losing their way. Released in 2015, it stripped down much of what people liked about the Fallout license and basically turned it into an open-world FPS with very light RPG elements. Dialogue, it was simplified. Skills, simplified. Character building, guess what? Simplified. It was all streamlined to make for this very repetitive and generic FPS mission game that felt nothing like Fallout. It was a very divisive game. And yes, the modding community has a field day with it and people love it now. But the base game back then, it was pretty rough. But speaking of rough, Fallout 76. One of the biggest disasters in Bethesda's book. It was supposed to be some multiplayer variant, survival variant, of Fallout. But not only was this something nobody asked for, it was a hot mess when it launched. It was very clear that Bethesda had rushed this one out the door because it barely even worked on day one. Some people even got their consoles bricked trying to run it. Could you imagine having a $500 console and then the game ruined your console? Then, add on all the terrible PR stunts Bethesda pulled and you have a recipe for controversy. Fallout 76 has to be one of the most talked about games ever, and that's not a good thing. Today, it's fixed up and a decent amount of people are enjoying it, but in its first year on the market, it was bad. At number 8, Borderlands The PreSequel. So, following the success of 1 and 2, I guess Gearbox felt that they could phone this one in. The PreSequel was released in 2014. It took place in between the first and second. The story focused on Handsome Jack, while the gameplay was pretty faithful to the previous ones with a handful of improvements. So as with many Borderlands games, it was hyped up beyond belief, but when it came out, people moved on. The new characters and mechanics, they were interesting. Fans of the series they weren't impressed with it and how many people thought it would just be a DLC. The PreSequel isn't a bad game, but I think most Borderlands fans will agree it's the weakest of the franchise, and I think it belongs here. It certainly promised greatness, and I don't think it lived up to it. At number 7, Aliens Colonial Marines. Speaking of Gearbox, the other famous blunder. Such a good concept. I hate talking about it because it bums me out. An action horror FPS set after the events of the 1986 movie? Come on, how do you screw that up? Well, bad AI, bad level design, bad writing, bad graphics, bad gameplay, and a story that makes absolutely no sense and contradicts the lore. That's how you screw it up. Doesn't really sound like a recipe for success. It launched to critical panic, many gamers calling it one of the worst shooters of the decade. Seriously, don't play it. At number 6, Halo 4. Now, following Bungie's departure, 343 was brought back in to pick up the pieces, get Master Chief back in the action. So they famously hired people who did not like Halo while developing Halo 4 because they wanted to bring new people into the franchise as opposed to appealing to longtime fans. Whose brilliant idea was that? Hindsight 2020, because this was stupid. Radical departure from the franchise formula. They added universal sprint, custom loadouts, ordnance drops, smaller maps, random power weapon spawns, more armor abilities. It was like a sci-fi Call of Duty clone, and while some players liked it, the core Halo fan base was furious, and Halo 4's multiplayer was almost completely dead less than a year after launch. Yep, that wasn't a good start for 343. At number 5, Wolfenstein Youngblood. Now, the rebooted series has been a roller coaster. New Order, fantastic, right? Youngblood, big pile of Jurassic Park crap. Instead of being a more old-school FPS, it was this grindy co-op shooter with bullet sponge enemies, horrible writing, and a story that did absolutely nothing for the universe. It honestly felt like a filler game. It was a filler game. Like the publisher needed a new game by the end of the year, so they hired the B team to slap it together. Yeah, it looks and sounds fantastic, but the gameplay and story is crap, and it seriously derailed the franchise's momentum. So hopefully, Wolfenstein 3 gets us back on track. At number 4, Cyberpunk 2077. One of the most hyped games in history. And when it launched, I think everybody in the world would agree it should have stayed the oven. I mean, you already know. Technical problems. I think they've refunded like 30,000 full copies. I don't know. Console versions didn't work. PC, it was a little better. Patches helped, but it was bad. It was a permanent dent in CD Projekt Red's reputation. The next time these guys announce a new RPG, people are going to be super skeptical before jumping on the hype train, and rightfully so. At number 3, Overkill's The Walking Dead. I personally drank the Kool-Aid. I did. It was responsible for Payday 2. Come on, one of the best co-op shooters ever made. So, I mean, it seemed like a perfect fit. Well, no. It was a disaster. It was horrible. It wasn't even finished. And a couple months after the PC release, guess what? The console ports were canceled, the PC version was pulled, and it effectively erased it from existence. You can find plenty of YouTube footage of the game. Just be thankful if you were spared and you didn't spend any money on it. At number 2, Dekatonic. John Romero was one of the masterminds behind Doom and Quake, so when he ventured out in his own studio, we paid attention. Their first game was an FPS called Dekatonic. It was supposed to be one of the most ambitious projects in gaming history. Guns, characters, enemies. Oh, yeah. But Romero's ego famously went to his head as the game was delayed multiple times to add more and more random stuff, and by the time it launched, not only did it look and feel like a relic from the past, It was just terrible. It was exactly what happens when a project has no consistent vision. But there's one game that encapsulates this even better. At number 1 of the FPS games that promised greatness and lied, Duke Nukem Forever. I don't really know how else to explain it. You know the stories. 15 years in development, one of the worst FPS games ever made, and it destroyed one of the most beloved characters in gaming history. There. It's dead. Duke Nukem's dead thanks to this game, and he's probably never coming back. So let that be a lesson to all of you. If a game is in development for 15 years, it's probably going to suck. Don't waste your money. So there you have it, my friends. Let me know one game that did deserve to make this list that didn't, and I'll see you soon.